One of the biggest differences between this case and so many other cases of police brutality is this was not a shooting. This was 9 minutes of a man with a smug look on his face and his hands in his pockets, kneeling on another man's neck. He wouldn't have done that to a dog in the street, okay? So to do that to a black man at 38th in Chicago, where the whole world saw it, right, afterwards on the video, I can't imagine there not being a conviction.
What a simple but powerful point she makes. In his column tonight, our friend Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post writes, quote, "Remember that Chauvin is the man on trial, not Floyd. Remember that the only reason police approached Floyd in the first place was that they suspected him of a minor nonviolent offense. Remember Floyd's desperate pleas that he couldn't breathe, that they're going to kill me, that he was dying. Remember, as if anyone could forget, that the U.S. criminal justice system is on trial as well. And remember that quite literally, the whole world is watching." Back with us tonight, Jason Johnson, campaign veteran, journalist, contributor to the Griot, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University, and Tim Miller, contributor to The Bulwark and the former communications director for Jeb Bush. Gentlemen, good evening to you both. Professor, I'd like to begin with you. Well, further proof tonight of why our friend Eugene has the Pulitzer Prize. I further want to play for you some comments by the civil rights lawyer Ben Crump on this network tonight. We'll discuss on the other side.
We all know that we can never take for granted that a police officer will be held accountable for killing a black person, and justifiably. So even though we think the video is very compelling, that we understand that this is a referendum on can black people get equal justice in America.
Professor, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you agree with Mr. Crump's central point, as well as Eugene's central point that the criminal justice system itself is on trial here.
I agree and disagree, Brian, because the criminal justice system is always on trial. And even if Derek Chauvin ends up being convicted, it doesn't mean it's a good criminal justice system. It doesn't mean black people are treated fairly. We've seen so many different people, the killing of Tamir Rice, the killing of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman, Timothy Loman getting away with what he did. There have been so many instances of police officers and random white individuals shooting and killing black people and not facing any consequences, that in this particular instance, where the entire planet watched an execution, if that happens to put this man in jail, that doesn't mean the system is fine. It reminds me, to be honest, of Holtzclaw, the case that was in Oklahoma City a couple of years ago, where a police officer was accused of serially raping black women in the city. He was convicted because the crime was so egregious that the law couldn't allow him to get away with it because they would have no justification for anything else they did. That's what this is. This may be a bridge too far, but it doesn't mean that all the bridges that have been burned by this criminal justice system have been fixed with black America.
Tim Miller, you had a unique and perhaps searing experience within the past year of speaking to and with a focus group of specifically older white voters. And I am told there's no video or audio of this because it was a condition of them being able to speak freely and not be recorded doing so. But having experienced it, Tim, what is that audience likely to take away from this trial?
Yeah, look, Brian, it was one of the more shocking focus groups. So we did a lot of them last year when I was working for Republican Voters Against Trump. And so by nature, obviously, we were talking to Republican voters. So it wasn't just older white voters, it was older white Republican voters. And I was bracing for the worst. And this is not to say that there aren't people that think the worst and feel the worst and say the worst out there. But in these swing states, repeatedly and across multiple focus groups, we heard from older white voters that were saying that their consciences were shocked by that George Floyd video, that it made them think twice about policing in this country and maybe change some of their prior views. I remember one woman in particular talking about her children and how passionately they felt about it and how they were out in the streets and protesting and how she wanted to understand where they were coming from. And so I think that this trial, in addition to the criminal justice system being on trial, as Eugene said, in addition to what Jason said, is another opportunity to galvanize maybe people who wouldn't be on the side of criminal justice reform naturally to come to that side, to encourage real reforms to the system. And I think that the political actors should see that potential opportunity here now that this is back in the news. And maybe that's a minor green shoot in this just horrible, unconscionable event.
And Jason, I ask because I must. Is the nation prepared for a not guilty verdict if that is indeed the judgment of this jury?
Brian, Black America is used to it, unfortunately. I mean, look, when I talk to my colleagues, my other professional colleagues, none of us would be shocked if Derek Chauvin got off scot-free. When people are convicted in this country by this criminal justice system for killing black folks, killing Atiana Jefferson in her home playing video games, killing Sandra Bland in some mysterious circumstance, Botham Jean in his house. When someone is actually held accountable in this country, someone white is held accountable in this country for killing somebody black, we're always shocked. We're used to nothing happening. So if Chauvin gets off scot-free, there will definitely be protests, there will definitely be anger, but in a twisted sort of way. The white supremacy that is endemic in America's criminal justice system has almost inured us. It's almost desensitized a lot of Black America to how bad things can be in this country, even when someone is arrested for a crime that millions of people across the planet all watch with their own eyes.
Hell of a point to pause on, but we must take a quick break here. Thankfully, both gentlemen have agreed to stay with us.
I look at it this way. The first time we have an excuse, there were about 100,000 deaths that came from that original surge. All of the rest of them, in my mind, could have been mitigated or decreased substantially if we took the lessons we had learned from that moment. That's what bothers me every day.
Can we talk about what she just said there? To be clear, we are talking about nearly 450,000 American lives that might not have been lost if the former president had put science over politics. And consider this just as a thought experiment. What if Dr. Birx had spoken up then instead of now to Sanjay Gupta on CNN? Still with us, Jason Johnson and Tim Miller. Tim, your publication, The Bulwark, tough piece on Deborah Birx. All we need to know, we can learn from the title, Shame on Deborah Birx. It goes on to say she wasn't doing her best in a bad situation. She was aiding and abetting the federal government's COVID disaster. And of course, for her loyalty, she got rewarded tonight when Trump called her a liar in a statement that in the old days would have been a tweet and is now a fax. And think about it. She was so obedient, so frightened, so silent in the face of all that death. How does she get rewarded for all that loyalty by getting stomped on tonight for Trump? And what could she possibly have to say to the loved ones of over 500,000 Americans? I tried my best. It's patently clear she didn't.
Yeah, some pretty crazy faxes coming out of South Florida these days, huh, Brian? Look, here's the thing with Deborah Birx, that if I want to put a finer point on it, the nail on the head that you hit, is she had an opportunity to speak out before the election. I mean, thank God that Joe Biden won this election, but it was a lot close. It was way too close for comfort. And if you were a human being and you're sitting there in the White House and you're trying, let's give her the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that she thought she was doing the best that she could to help the country, and yet her efforts failed. And because the president is so crazy, almost 500,000 additional Americans have died, and yet you still sit on your hands and you still sit silently during this election when our country's fate, when all of these people who have lived and died's fate hang in the balance. I mean, it is shameful. It's unconscionable. And just look by comparison at what, Olivia Troy, who worked on that COVID task force, did. She tried her best. She said she was serving her country. She wanted people to live. And then finally, when she saw the president was just too crazy, she spoke out and she cut an ad and said, we can't do this anymore. We need the other guy. That's what you do if you're actually bothered, if you are actually concerned about the real life harm you cause. What Deborah Birx is doing right now is just face saving.
Professor, I'm glad Tim just mentioned Olivia Troy. I'm going to play for you some of what she said to Nicole Wallace on her show this afternoon.
I think there should be an investigation because people should not be able to get away with the number of deaths and suffering that happened in this country under the previous administration. There are a lot of people who enabled this moment that are complicit.
Jason, why is the courage to speak up, courage in general, in such short supply? And remember, people like Mike Pence want to be president. And to do that, Mike Pence is going to try to, that's going to require getting us to forget that he, as head of that task force, presided over what, 400,000 of these deaths?
400,000 of these deaths didn't contradict, didn't in all sort of contrast the president when we told people to not wear masks, was involved in all sorts of lies. There are so many different people that in a just and verdant world would be held accountable for their mistakes in this last administration. But Dr. Birx in particular, I think this is important, not just to contrast her with Dr. Anthony Fauci, but because, as you've pointed out, when she talked about this is all sort of the Mark Short going to UVA, my alma mater, to clean up his act, Sean Spicer going on Dancing with the Stars. It's all part of this sort of disgusting cleanup act that many people complicit in this administration's failures, past administration's failures, are trying to do. And it's up to us to continue to hold them accountable. She can tell whatever story she wants to tell, but I don't want Stanford, I don't want Harvard, I don't want UVA, I don't want any Michigan, I don't want any institutions giving her a teaching position. I don't want any think tanks giving her an opportunity to rehabilitate herself by writing white papers in a book. These people were responsible for the largest swath of death this country has ever faced, not just in our lifetime. This country has faced in almost a century, and they should not be allowed to spend their way out of it by saying they were bothered, a la Susan Collins, they had concerns, when in fact they knew what they were doing and what they were participating in was not only wrong, but deadly.
Professor, hold some of that passion for when former Secretary Azar comes out with his version of the truth, which Politico warns us is on its way. Jason Johnson, Tim Miller, gentlemen, we could do this for the entire hour. Thank you both for being friends of the broadcast and joining us this Monday night.